Hey everyone, welcome back. You know how sometimes you go through something tough and you end up discovering like this inner strength you never knew you had?
Hmm.
We're going to be diving deep into that idea today, especially when it comes to breakups.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you shared some plans for a podcast, Breakups Unpacked, and it
Yeah,
seems like it's all about finding those silver linings, things we might not expect. We're excited to unpack that with you.
absolutely. Breakups definitely get a bad rap for a reason, but there's this whole other side to them, like this potential for positive change that I think often gets overlooked.
Okay, so let's unpack it. This Breakups Unpacked idea, it seems to have this really positive spin on the whole breakup thing. Like, instead of just focusing on the heartache, it encourages people to use that experience to learn about themselves, maybe rediscover some passions, or even like find a love that's even better suited for them.
You know what's so interesting about that? It actually lines up perfectly with how we understand human psychology.
Real.
After we go through that initial, like, wave of grief, which, by the way, is totally natural, we have to feel those things.
Yes, yeah.
But after that, often, we start looking inward. You know, we start to examine our needs, desires, what we're really looking for in a partner. And sometimes it could be that unexpected opportunity to kind of hit the reset button on life.
That actually reminds me of this point in the podcast plan. It talks about something they call relationship clarity. And I feel like, honestly, who couldn't use a little bit more of that?
Right. Exactly.
But how does it suggest people actually go about, like, achieving that?
Well, one of the episodes talks about using past relationships to help you understand, like, your deal breakers and values,
Oh, okay.
which is huge.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing those red flags you may have missed and getting really clear on what you will and will not put up with.
Yeah.
And yeah, it might bring up some uncomfortable stuff,
For sure.
but facing those head on is honestly the key to kind of breaking those unhealthy cycles.
That's so true. Sometimes you have to go through it to realize what you don't want.
Yes.
And then you're like, okay, well, now I know what I do want. Like a process of elimination.
Exactly. And it's not even just romantic relationships. Like, breakups can bring this, like, opportunity to examine all kinds of patterns we have in our lives.
That's really interesting. So it's not just about finding, like, quote unquote, the one. It's about becoming a better version of yourself.
Exactly. Breakups can push us to be more independent, more resilient, more confident in navigating life on our own. And that kind of self-assurance ends up, like, impacting all areas of our lives, our careers, our friendships, our passions, everything.
Okay, I like this. So the podcast plan, it doesn't just stop at the individual level.
Right.
There's a whole section about support systems after a breakup. Friends, family, even just the community around you. I feel like we forget that sometimes. That we don't have to go through it alone.
It's such a good point. Like, yeah, self-reliance is important, but having those people you can lean on during tough times, it's crucial. And breakups actually often, they have this way of strengthening those bonds we have.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like, going through a difficult thing together, it can really solidify friendships and bring families closer.
It's like a breakup can actually show you how strong your other relationships are. The ones that are really meant to last.
Yeah.
Like you said, romantic love might come and go, but those really core connections, those are still there.
Exactly. And they can be so empowering when you're healing and trying to rebuild. Like, you really start to recognize how strong those connections are and who shows up for you when you need it most. Like, you are loved and supported even when it doesn't feel like it.
And it's not just about leaning on the relationships you already have, right? This podcast, Breakups Unpacked, it also talks about connecting with people who've been there too.
Right.
Sharing those experiences. Like, they even have a whole episode about listener stories about how they grew from their breakups. Oh, wow. Yeah. And that's such a powerful part of healing and growth. Just hearing how other people have dealt with heartbreak, how they got through it and came out stronger on the other side.
Yeah.
It can really make you feel less alone.
It's true. It's like that saying, shared pain is halved pain.
Yeah.
Even if you just know someone else gets it,
Yeah,
it can make a huge difference.
absolutely. And it can even create new connections. Like you find this community
That's nice.
that comes out of this tough time.
And that actually reminds me of another episode in this plan. It's about finding your passions again after a breakup.
Oh, interesting.
Because it's easy to put those things on the back burner when you're in a relationship,
Right.
but then you have all this time and energy.
Yeah, and you get to reconnect with those parts of yourself that maybe you haven't given as much attention to.
Yeah.
Like, think about it. What did you love doing before you were in that relationship? What have you always wanted to try but never have? It's like this chance to kind of hit the reset button and go after those passions. I love that. So it's not about the past, it's about designing this future that really feels like you.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got self-reflection, we've got leaning on your people, rediscovering passions. But what about finding love again?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Right.
And, this podcast, it doesn't shy away from that at all. It actually has a whole episode about it.
Oh, that's great.
Because for a lot of people, that is the goal.
It is.
And it emphasizes approaching dating differently this time around.
Okay, so it's not just about finding someone new.
Right. It's about finding someone who's right for you now.
I like that.
Yeah.
What are some of the takeaways about finding new love after a breakup? Like, what does it say?
So one thing it really stresses is making sure you've had time to heal and reflect before jumping back into dating. Because if you rush into something new before you've processed the last relationship, you might fall into old patterns.
Yeah, that makes sense. You got to learn from it first.
Exactly. You don't want to keep making the same mistakes.
Nobody wants that.
So it's about using that knowledge to make better choices next time.
Okay, so you've taken the time, you've healed, reflected, rediscovered yourself. What's next? So you've taken the time, you've healed, you've reflected, you've rediscovered yourself. What's next? How do you actually start dating again? What does this podcast say?
Well, it actually encourages people to kind of change their whole perspective on dating.
Okay.
Like, think of it as this adventure instead of something you have to do.
Okay.
Put yourself out there, try new things, meet new people, but with an open mind.
I like that. Like, enjoy the journey instead of just trying to find the finish line.
Right. And be open to anything. You never know what you'll find or who you'll meet.
So we've talked about self-reflection support systems, finding your passions, and even new love. It seems like this podcast covers it all. But are there any like overall words of wisdom it offers listeners going through this?
Definitely. The biggest thing is that even though breakups are really hard, they can completely change you for the better.
Yeah.
It reminds people that what they're going through is normal. Healing takes time. And with every heartbreak comes a chance to learn and grow from it.
It's like that idea of post-traumatic growth, right? You come out stronger and more resilient than before.
Yes, exactly. And this podcast really shows how that applies to relationships.
It's true. Sometimes you need to lose yourself to find yourself.
That's such a good way to put it. And a lot of times those big aha moments happen after a big change, like a breakup.
It's like this whole new chapter.
And the podcast really encourages people to embrace that, to trust the process and believe in their own ability to be happy again.
So to wrap up our deep dive into Breakups Unpacked, what's the main thing you hope people take away from it?
That even though breakups hurt, they can be a really powerful force for positive change. It's about shifting your perspective from just the heartbreak to seeing what you can learn from it and how you can grow from it.
It makes you wonder, what if we looked at breakups with more curiosity and less fear? Like, what would happen if we saw them not as failures, but as opportunities for a fresh start? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.